Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Do you ever feel like you and your partner speak different languages regarding money? If so, believe me, trust me, you're not alone. Our resident psychologist, Dr. Jennifer Dragonette, is back for a conversation that's equal parts practical, personal, and a little bit of fun. We're talking about the classic clash between spenders and savers, why it happens, how to navigate it, and what it takes to turn financial friction into a stronger connection. From our walk and talks to exploring the deeper stories we carry about money, this conversation is full of honest, relatable, therapist-approved guidance, and even a few good laughs. Wait until you hear about the pickles. Whether you're deep in financial negotiations with your partner or want to understand your own patterns better, this episode is packed with real-life insights, some proven strategies, and of course, some stories that are going to hit home. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. Dr. Jen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, it's always great to have these monthly conversations, despite some of the technical difficulties we've been having. But this month, I want to talk about something that's probably like near and dear to my heart, both personally and professionally. And it's probably something we haven't necessarily dived deep in. We probably talked about it on the fringes. But when working with couples, partners on saving versus spending, and I've heard it said something like this, or I know I've read it, where if in a relationship, if you have a saver and another saver, that's great. If you're in a relationship and you have a spender and another spender, that works too. But when you have one spouse or partner that's a saver and the other one is a spender, that's when things get really interesting, because those two forces seem like they're always on a collision course. And so I wanted to talk through, what your advice and I know you've probably worked with couples and partnerships in your private practice on this very topic. So selfishly, I probably have said this on the podcast before. In my relationship with my wife, Teresa, I'm more the saver and she's more the spender. And it's always been been that way. We've been married for almost 19 years now. Somehow we've made it work. But I think it's getting a little tougher as these triplets plus one get older and the expenses get higher. So with that said, let me turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Well, and it's funny, as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, there's a lot more to spend on, isn't there, as our kids get older and, the expenses go from little child expenses to big adult people expenses. And so it does seem timely, both for your family and I know a
Yeah,
lot
because
of
we're
people.
talking about cars now, and I'm just like, gosh,
Oof, how many cars,
how did I
right?
get here?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it really is. It's an important topic. And even if we have two people who think of themselves as savers or two people who think of themselves as spenders, chances are good that it's not exactly the same in terms of how they see the world. And so it is a good dynamic to talk about and to think about and really for couples to plan toward, because we're almost never going to be exactly on the same page as our partner in terms of what we think deserves to be spent on or what we think needs to be saved for. So I think even if you and your partner, folks who are listening, if you think of yourselves, oh, we're both spenders or we're both savers, I think it's an important conversation to have, because there will be moments when you'll disagree on the inherent value of something, or do we spend on this versus something else? So one of the things that I do often when I'm working with couples, first of all, I bring up money early and often in couples therapy, even if that's not what they've come to me to work with specifically, because it is one of the things that I see causing the most friction. Really, if we think about what most couples tend to disagree about, at some point it's going to be, what do we spend our money on? How do we interact with our extended family? How do we raise children, right? So there are these general things that are going to come up in relationships. And as we've talked about before, Paul, a lot of this really tracks back to how we were raised, how we think about money, and how we think about what is enough. I know that's a big topic that at some point we'll come back to, just this general idea of what is enough and when do we have enough. And my favorite thing, what are our values, right? What is really important to us? It's all about how we spend things. So when we think of even just that term values, money is a construct. Right. We say we have money because we look in the bank account and we see more zeros than we used to have. But we're not going and counting our hoards of gold, right? We're not bartering and trading for things. So essentially, if we really pull back from it, money and spending money is about deciding that this is valuable. I'm willing to give some value to this thing, or you are willing to say that what I can offer you is valuable. And so we agree on that. And so we can blow that back out into, for couples, what does it mean to you to know that you have enough, in quotes? What does it mean to you to treat yourself? What does that look like and what does that feel like? So I like to go way back in terms of questions around how do we think about money in general? And some of the things I think when you and I first connected a couple of years ago, this was part of our original conversation around couples, was what were your parents' views on money? What were their parents' views on money? We don't often go back a couple generations, and it can be really valuable to do that, because we might discover that while our family has always been relatively comfortable, our partner's family has not, or maybe vice versa. Or we're walking around with beliefs about money that we assume our partner shares, and they might not. So I tend to say, let's do this not in a heated moment, not when we're physiologically flooded. So not while we're looking at our taxes, for example, or not while we are at the car dealership deciding whether we're going to buy that car, is it new or used, but in a calm moment, maybe with someone like me or someone like you by their side, to start unraveling these messages about money, about the inherent value of money, and why we either feel like it's important to save or it's important to spend. So I'll dive into that a little bit more, but that's in general how I would say we start to approach that conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And one of the last things you just said actually took me back to a conversation that we just had a month or two ago about being prepared and not like having these conversations like in the heat of the moment. So how can we step back and think about, I know we've talked about this before and brought it up, but is this financial date night, which sounds so sexy.
Doesn't it?
Yes. And it's easier said than done, especially when your kids are going all over, like ours feel like they are now. We're running 7 days a week. And I wish that Teresa and I made the effort to have that financial discussion, or just household meeting, like once a week or even once every 2 weeks. And we're not that great at it either. And here I am trying to get other couples and families that I work with to do this because I know the value of it, but I also understand and have empathy that it's not that easy. So, with that being said, I think going back to one of your other points on values is that if we can find alignment between couples and partners on that purpose and objectives and values, that makes these conversations a whole lot easier.
Absolutely. So, kind of point by point there, I think, we've talked a lot about that idea of, whether we call it a financial date night, or I sometimes call it a walk and talk, where sometimes it's easier to have these conversations when we aren't sitting across the table from each other as though we're in an executive board meeting.
Those conversations are a little bit easier now in Michigan, now that the weather's changing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We're recording this in May. You can go and be in the sunshine for a minute. And in those conversations, what I'm looking for as a psychologist is I want our heart rate to be low. Right. I want to know that our physiology is supporting us in being calm during these conversations. And so I really do look for biological markers like, do I feel shaky? Do I feel flushed? Is my heart rate getting high? Because if that happens, it means that I'm feeling scared. And money is one of these topics where fear becomes a really big part of the conversation. If we even just take those two as though they are binary, a saver and a spender, there's fear behind both of those, right? The saver is afraid, most likely, that there won't be enough or they'll run out. Maybe they've seen family members go through bankruptcy or lose a home or be laid off for a period of time. And so there's probably real fear there. Similarly, for the spender, there may be fear around, can I have the life that I've worked so hard to have? Is my family going to be able to enjoy things? Maybe they grew up in a situation where they didn't have enough and now they do, and they don't want to live like that or feel like that anymore. So there may be real reasons why each person feels so strongly about their position on this. And so if we watch our physiology, we can put ourselves in a position to have these conversations without it feeling like it's being an attack. If I feel like my partner is saying, you are looking at this wrong, I'm going to flood, right? I'm going to feel like I've been accused of something shameful. You're too much of a saver. You're too much of a spender. It starts to feel combative. So the best advice I can give is if it starts to feel like our body is not our friend in those moments, to just gently tap out. Say, we can't do this right now. I'm a little too heated. Let's come back later today. Let's come back in 30 minutes. We have to come back to it or else we're really stonewalling that conversation. But I think that there's a lot of merit.
Stonewalling. That's one of
yes,
the four horsemen of the apocalypse of marriage, right?
Correct.
Who am I? The person that came up with that?
John Gottman. Yep.
Gottman,
So,
yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So Gottman, this is something that I talk with all of my couples about that. And if anybody isn't familiar with that term, John and Julie Gottman are excellent couples researchers and therapists. They've written many, many books. I incorporate their work into my couples therapy. And the four horsemen of the apocalypse are the four markers that they've found over time really correlate with couples staying together and staying together happily. And those four things that we look for are criticism and contempt, which are kind of along the same spectrum, but I think it's going to be relevant for this conversation. So I'll come back to that. Defensiveness and stonewalling. So when any of those four things are present with couples, we want to be really mindful that that is going to deteriorate the relationship over time. Criticism and contempt do not mean that you have a complaint about something. We need to come to each other with our complaints. But criticism often is, you have done something wrong. You are too frivolous. You are too frugal, right? It's an attack on that person. And contempt, which I think can come into these conversations if we're not careful, is, I would never do that, right? It's kind of this, I'm better than you. I'm looking down my nose at you. It may include name calling. It might not. Sometimes contempt is very nonverbal, where it's eye rolling or again, right? You bought this again, or right. So we can go from, wow, I disagree with that, or I really see things differently, or even I don't like that, to you are wrong. and we start injecting shame into the conversation. And so that is one of the four horsemen. And then we can imagine that defensiveness probably follows right behind it. If we're criticizing or being contemptuous, of course our partner is going to respond with defensiveness, which is going to make us feel unheard, and we are in this negative spiral. So what stonewalling is refusing to have these conversations, or being not present to have the conversations, or being too intoxicated to have the conversations, and never returning to it. So it's like this approach avoidance where the conversation never happens and everybody feels like they're not supported.
You know, when you were going through that, I was thinking about the point you made earlier about like this financial date night, and rather you called it a walk and talk. And that stuck with me, because you're talking about these physiological things going on within our bodies when we're trying to have these conversations with our spouse or partner. And if you're already being active, it seems like from a physiological standpoint, the nerves may be a little, right, like muted, maybe. Like it's easier to have those conversations when you're moving, rather than when you're just in a closed room, or even out to dinner, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It really is. It's one of my favorite pieces of advice for couples to just start incorporating, whether it's a financial walk and talk, a parenting walk and talk, a general state of the union walk and talk, early and often, whether we need it or not, right? If you don't need to discuss anything, you just have a nice walk together. More often, there is something, and I like to say, what is the thing that you just haven't wanted to talk about this week, or the thing that you've been looking for the right time to talk about this week or this month? Because you're exactly right. Our body is meant to move when we're stressed. That's what a fight or flight reflex is really doing, is it's sending blood and adrenaline to the parts of our body that need to move. And so if we're feeling a little stressed and we force ourselves to sit, all of that stress is going to just continue to metabolize in our body. It's not going to go anywhere. But we can move, right? We can move our bodies. It calms our nervous system. It's a little bit less stressful than staring intently into our partner's eyes and discussing why we think about money the way we do. So it's a nice way to start. And what I would say is, particularly if someone's thinking about beginning this conversation, I would start in a really benign way, not saying, how much money are we going to spend per car for our triplets? But saying more like, I realize I don't really know why you think about money the way you do. And maybe you don't know why I think about money the way I do. Would you be willing to hear about that? Because I'd really like to hear from you. And to listen, to understand, rather than to rebut. That's one of the things that can happen, particularly when we've been together for a long time, or maybe we think we know how that person thinks, or we think we know how they should think, is that we're going to listen and we're just already forming our counter argument as though we're on a debate team. And we're not, right? This is the person I hope that we love the most in this world. And if we can understand them, and this is really a phrase that I say a lot in couples therapy, if we deeply understand our partner's emotional needs, it changes the landscape. We may not agree, but we can understand where it comes from for them. So listening to understand looks like potentially repeating back what you heard or summarizing what you heard. I like to really clearly take turns in these conversations where we say, okay, for the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to try to understand you. You tell me all these things. I have so much curiosity around it. I'm not going to be telling you how I feel about it. I just want to listen. And if I'm not getting it, please help me understand. And then I'd like to switch so that you understand me. Then we have a slightly different framework to start these conversations from, because now I can see, and I do really think of people like this. I can look at my partner and see this little guy in there who maybe didn't have enough growing up. Or they can look at me and see this little girl in there who, came up in this world thinking about money in a certain way, or watching my parents spend or not spend. We have a lot more compassion for each other when we can see the fear person in there. We can see that part of us that might be, feeling like we never got enough. And so now we want to prove to ourselves that we are worth something, right? Sometimes when people are spending, it's a way to fulfill wishes that they didn't get to fulfill when they were younger, or to feel like they're really valuing their life, their family's life. And often for people who feel really strongly about saving, there's a scared person in there who is just really concerned that we're going to run out or that they won't be taken care of. And that feels much less combative than you spend too much or you're too cheap, right? That feels much more attacking.
You actually just answered the question I was going to ask, is like, how do you, with your spouse or partner, be able to come back and talk about what it was like growing up in the financial, ups and downs that maybe you experienced, and what key life events or transitions really had an impact on you that kind of made your thoughts on money the way that they are today. Mm-hmm. So I think you did a great job explaining that. One of the other things I want to come back to, though, is in your work with the couples in your practice, how the couples that you've seen make these walk and talks or these weekly or biweekly date nights work, have you been able to glean like any like best practices as far as like how these couples actually did it? Like, how did they make, this habit stick?
Mm-hmm. I have. And it's a great question. It's a very practical question. Again, some of this stuff, as you say, is not sexy. It's often about planning, right? Quite literally, what day of the week, and I will really try to nail this with couples before they leave my office. What day of the week are you going to do this? What time are you going to do this? What barriers do you anticipate? Do you need childcare while you do this? Do you need to do this after the kids have gone to bed? Who will initiate this? Could you take turns initiating this? So it's not just one person saying, hey, it's Sunday morning at 9 a.m., time for our walk, because that can start to feel like a parental kind of dynamic. And that's often part of the problem with this dynamic, is that the saver ends up feeling like the parent in that relationship, and the spender ends up feeling like the naughty kid in that relationship. Again, not sexy, right? We don't really want that dynamic with our spouse or with our partner. So I'll take that as the couples therapist and say, I am assigning you, right? This is your homework. You're going to do this at this time. You've decided that this is your plan, and I'll check back in with you. So I think having someone like me or you there just for an external source of accountability is also really helpful. And I have had lots of couples say, we almost didn't do our walk and talk, but we knew we were going to have to come and see you. And we didn't want to say, Dr. Jen, we didn't do our homework.
Well, that's a really good point, because you basically become their responsibility partner. And yes. I think when you have something like that, and I know that a lot of people have chosen to work with me or other financial advisors, not because they couldn't do the work themselves, but because they didn't trust themselves enough to do the work that they know that they needed to do. And so they work with somebody like me because they know that early on, they know pretty well that I'm going to be holding them accountable, that I don't necessarily... I hope I have good bedside manner, but they also know that they're coming to me and expecting sometimes to hear the hard truths that, again, maybe they intuitively already know, but having somebody else say something to them, and me, and probably in your case too, with your private practice, is being that independent third party arbitrator to be able to thread that needle between maybe two people that are on different sides. And, part of our jobs, I think, and what we do is to obviously help bring these people together to find that common ground and find that those links that help solidify their purpose, their values, their objectives on where they want to go.
Yes, exactly. So I think having that accountability is important. We don't need to have a third party, and it can certainly help. And one of the things that I also recommend is that we find something about our partner's viewpoint that we really do appreciate. It's similar to how we've talked about the idea of validation, right? Finding something that makes sense in there. Even if 95% of what we're hearing feels terrifying because it's different than how we see it, there is something that we can find to appreciate. The spender in a relationship, if we want to kind of binarily create it into two roles, the spender is really important in a relationship, right? I tend to be a little bit more of a saver. And, story that came up that I will share with you here, something funny that came up between me and my husband, who is also quite a saver and yet a little bit more of a spender than I can be, in a way that I'm actually trying to incorporate more into my life. This is one of my goals with my financial planner. He's like, Jen, go on vacation, spend some money, right? It's going to be okay. And I had this, funny moment a couple months ago where my husband really loves, he'll laugh that I'm telling the story. He really loves this expensive brand of pickles, right? And he'll come home with this brand of pickles, and I'm looking at those pickles like, oh man, those are really expensive pickles. Are we really spending that much money on pickles, right? And so guess what I do? I don't eat the pickles. So he's eating the pickles. I'm getting resentful because they're expensive pickles. And I finally did what I talk about all the time on here, which is I pulled back from those thoughts. And I said, why don't I deserve to eat one of those pickles? Those look really tasty, right? And so here's this is exactly what I recommend with couples. I decided maybe I also can enjoy those, right? We're spending money on those anyway. I eat one of those pickles. It's delicious. Now I enjoy them too. And it's a little bit of exposure therapy. So exposure therapy is we're moving towards something that's important to us in bite-sized ways, in just baby steps. I'm not going to go, buy some huge expensive thing just to prove to myself that I can do it. But I can say, I deserve a little luxury every once in a while, right? It's not a big deal. I'll try it. I'll let myself get comfortable with it, realize that I too deserve these nice things. And I value the part of my partner where he says, hey, we don't have to, just be destitute here. We don't have to be eating leftovers all the time, right? We can have little things that make us happy. And I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that he encourages me to go on a vacation because I need to, right? He can appreciate that before we met, I saved a lot, right? And so I was able to, have money in the bank so I know that I can afford my children's college education and things like that. So finding things that are different and building some appreciation for that can be a really valuable step here. So it's not just an adversarial relationship.
Yeah, I listen to you tell that story. I immediately go to thinking of Teresa and I, because I'm the same way. And ironically, this is one of the conversations I've been having with my therapist about being able to let loose a little bit. And part of this is practicing what I preach, because I actually have several retired women that I work with that I'm always encouraging them, show me the plane tickets, show me taking your grandkids out for this event, because the chances are that they're not going to spend all the money that they've saved. And this is probably a topic for another conversation, is getting out of that mindset where you've saved your entire career of 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden having to switch on a dime where you're no longer getting that paycheck coming in and relying on somebody like me to help guide you through this transition where you're starting to draw down your savings. And that is, I think that is one of the most underappreciated life transitions that anyone goes through. And
yeah, it's a remarkable shift. It really is. And even if we're not at that cusp where we have to immediately shift from saving to spending, these conversations in relationships can feel like that. Right? All of a sudden we have to start paying for college or cars for teenagers, or, life takes a turn and we have to spend more than we typically would in a given year. And, I often return to that concept of our values, that if we have a sense of what is important to us, we can start to think of spending as moving toward our values. There really isn't an inherent value in saving, right? If I ask people, what is your value system? Saving money is typically not a value that we have, right? What are we saving for? We're saving for, right? Whatever, right? We're saving for security. We're saving for comfort. We're saving for, that we know we can finally go to a safari in Africa, right? We're saving for something. And that's often the shift that we need to make is, can we, and exposure therapy can be a way of this, can we just start to move toward that, see what it feels like, get some evidence that we didn't fall apart, that our family is still intact, that our relationship is still intact, and then move a little bit more in that direction. It could be that the couple needs to do that because they've been spending more than they need to, right? And pulling back in to say, wait, we value something. Can we move toward this with our relationship values intact? And I think, one piece that is more your world than mine, and yet I recommend it a lot, is an actual budget. Again, not super sexy, but it can be really freeing in a lot of ways to sit down, and this is probably a good, clear the decks kind of a day, maybe go out to a nice breakfast, get yourselves calm, and then really work out, what do we need to spend on? How much money is really coming in? Get clear and realistic, either in your presence or alone or in my presence. And pull back and look at that and say, okay, so what does that mean, right? Does this mean that we have any extra this year? If we don't, that's important for us to know, and we need to be aligned about that. If we do, what do we want to do with that? Do we want to split that into a spend and save bucket? Do we want to give each partner some to spend so that they feel like they still get to enjoy the fruits of their labors and all of the things that we've worked so hard for, right? Do we have a fun fund where we put that in and we use it as needed for spontaneous fun things? That's where the couple gets to get creative and really think about the values in the relationship. And if it's vastly different, if one person is just never going to be comfortable spending and one person is never going to be comfortable saving everything, then I do really recommend having some numbers in mind. Saying, okay, for your happiness and health, you've got to know that there's this flexible spending amount, right? Just even if it's $50 a month, right? You've just got to know that that's there for you. I'm not going to question it. I'm not going to have contempt around it. And I've got to know that it's not going to be more than that. And if we really need to, we can get extremely creative. Maybe that's cash. And so it can't be spent more than that. What I don't want to do is get into a dynamic where one person is overseeing the behavior of the other in either direction. Yes. That's not great for a relationship. It doesn't feel good to either party. It doesn't feel good to the person who's overly responsible. It doesn't feel good to the person who's being monitored. And that can really add to that essentially parent-child dynamic in a relationship, which is never going to feel good.
Yeah, full disclosure, I hate the term budgeting. I always refer to it as a spending plan. And most people are kind of shocked when they first start working with me because they think that I'm going to create this like big elaborate Excel spreadsheet and like you can only spend X amount on this category and that category and that category. And I'm very transparent, like, no, that's not how this works. So we could save that conversation for another day. But I think in closing, I just want to come back to, the one point that you kind of laid out in the beginning is it doesn't matter if you're two savers or two spenders or a saver or a spender. The main, I guess, point or objective that couples want to achieve is to get on the same page when it comes to their values, purpose, and objectives. And I feel like this probably comes up in just about every conversation we've had over the last couple of years, but it does because it's so important.
Exactly. And, getting on the same page doesn't mean that we have to be identical. We aren't going to be. And I would even say, let's assume that we're not going to be identical about this. Getting on the same page simply means I understand why you feel the way you do, and you understand why I feel the way I do. And it's neither is bad or wrong. Because those four horsemen that we talked about, they tend to come up when we feel ashamed or when we feel, really scared, or often a combination of the two. And money is one of these topics that can easily, very, very quickly make people feel ashamed on either side of that spectrum, right? I save too much. I'm too stingy. I'm not generous, right? Or I'm too spendy. I'm not frugal enough. I'm careless. We start assigning really negative, pejorative terms to both sides of that spectrum. And when we can really understand, it's often a really good intentioned person doing their best based on the values that they grew up with, or based on maybe the opposite of the values that they grew up with. Sometimes we set ourselves in opposition to that. And to see, again, I really try to come back to this little part of us in there that's trying to do our best, that feels really bad when it's accused of not doing its best. And to try to reassure that part of us, like, you're not wrong. right? We see this differently. It's, we just have different outlooks on this. And there's going to be some overlap. I might be all the way over here, you might be all the way over there. And there will be some piece where we can agree. And then some pieces where we can say, I don't see it that way. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong, right? I'm going to work on getting comfortable, maybe moving a little bit in your direction. Maybe you can get comfortable moving a little bit in my direction. And I encourage the couples I work with to see that as an act of love when that happens. And that's the phrase I use. Like, wow, you just used a coupon. That is an act of love for me. And what we appreciate, we get more of. And so if I say that out loud, it's going to happen more often. Right? If my husband says to me, I'm so proud of you, and he will say this, I'm so proud of you for treating yourself to that thing, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, you noticed, right? I am working on that to go buy some pickles. Exactly. They're really tasty, right? And so when I get to hear that, I'm like, okay, you're seeing this, you're seeing me, you're seeing the work that I'm doing, and I can do more of that. It's scary, but I can do it, right? So when we can support each other in relationship moving toward the middle, we're going to have so much more success than trying to convince someone to see the world the way we see it.
Yeah, I think I think we've left so many future topics and conversations on the table during this conversation, but I think that's an excellent point to leave this one at. So, Dr. Jen, I can't thank you enough for being on as always and having these great conversations. And just remember, listeners, if there's a topic that you want Dr. Jen and I to cover, as you guys should know by now, we've had several of you email in and we've covered those topics before. So feel free to email your thoughts, and we'll look forward to having you on again here soon, Dr. Jen. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul.
I think this is a conversation with Dr. Jen that'll spawn several more conversations around this topic of trying to find this harmony in our relationships with our spouses or partners around money, and how there are so many more deeper issues to dig into. And just thinking about this, if you want to have a great relationship with your spouse, partner around not only you're raising kids or financials, you name it, you're going to want to put in the work. You're going to have to put in the work. And I'm hoping that you're all finding the benefit of Dr. Jen's insights from her own career in therapy and practicing with couples on these topics. And one of the things that we talked about was digging into each other's money stories. We all grow up completely different than our spouses and partners. And so we need to dig a little deeper into ourselves to understand our own money stories and how we were grown up or taught about money growing up. And likewise, be able to understand what our other person that we're in a relationship with their money story, what it was like for them growing up with money. And so trying to get on the same page, and even going a little bit deeper than that, just having an understanding and having empathy around where that other person came from can really take the pressure off of some of these conflicts we may have around spending, no matter if you're a saver or a spender. And as Dr. Jen pointed out time and time again, and we talked about this on the podcast for years now, is creating this self-awareness of what it is that you want, what your spouse wants, and how you can come together to create some harmony between these things. And having, and here's the word, a set purpose and objectives jointly on a piece of paper, and that helps guide and drive you forward. So I believe that there was a lot of great insights into and practical strategies that Dr. Jen gave. One was the talk and walks, which she's talked about before. Another is finding somebody that will hold you accountable, whether it's a financial advisor like myself, a therapist like Dr. Jen, or maybe a close friend. It doesn't matter, but I think if you're willing to put in the work, it's sometimes easier if you have an accountability partner
And that could be your spouse or partner too. But one of you or both of you have to be able to say, yes, I want to do this. I want to make things better. I want to find common ground. How do we do that? Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.